welcome back to Building Sustainability Podcast. This is episode number 8.
Excellent. I can't believe it's 8.
8 o'clock. It is 8 o'clock.
Yeah.
This month's podcast is with Kiko Denzer. Kiko Denzer may be most known for writing the book Build Your Own Earth Oven. I would say that he, if not directly, has sort of indirectly influenced probably 90% of all the cob ovens ever built. I think he would be a bit more modest about that.
Probably.
I did ask him how many he'd built, and he declined to answer.
He did. More than 3.
Yeah. So Kiko is an artist, a spoon carver, a builder, and a publisher, and many, many other things.
Yeah.
Just a wonderful human being. He lives in Oregon, United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
He was over in this part of the world visiting family and managed to coincide the family visit with Spoonfest. I met up with Kiko at Spoonfest, and it turned out that he was actually staying just down the road from our site.
Yeah.
Of our current build. So he came along and had a look round and stayed for dinner.
It was really good.
Very lovely. I think he won over the students. Well,
Absolutely.
Not that they needed winning over, but
yeah,
he was a firm favourite.
Yeah. No, it was really good to have him here.
So I know Kiko from Oregon. Oregon is where I did my initial training way back when I started this journey. At a place called Aprovecho. We chat a little bit about that course. Then we skirt around spoons a lot. Having just come back from Spoonfest, it was obviously quite fresh in our minds. So there's a lot of little mentions, and then I think we finally get onto the topic later on. We talk a little bit about Christopher Alexander and the pattern language. A pattern language?
Yep.
One of those two. We chat a little bit about building. Obviously, we talk ovens. And I think, I don't know if you can hear that screechy bird in the background. Of course, it goes silent.
Yeah, typical.
And we talk about Kiko's home that he's just finished building himself.
Yeah.
Him and his family. This month's podcast was recorded in our makeshift booth, which was our half-built straw bale house.
Oh, yeah.
It does mean that occasionally there's a little bit of a rustle because we were sat on straw
Sat on
bales.
bales, yeah.
Yeah. So, look out for that. We discussed two little things that I want to talk more about at the end of the podcast. There's a conversation about a talk that was at Spoonfest. Jane, who's a GP, and the work she's been doing. So we discussed that a little bit, and we'll talk about that more at the end. And then also, Kiko poses a question about flint buildings that I now know the answer to.
Oh, amazing.
So stay tuned right till the end and we'll discuss that.
Wonderful.
Nice. Do you want to tell the world?
Hello, world.
Do you want to tell them what has been going on here?
Yeah, we are, as we're recording this, in the final stages of our summer build. So we're in the last 4-week stretch, which is when things get really hectic, but things also start to get really beautiful.
Very much so.
Yeah, so all the students have been doing an amazing job at getting all of our walls nice and straight, ready for the plaster. So they're dubbing it all out. Yeah, it's really starting to take shape. We've got some beautiful windows in. The cladding is starting to go on.
Yeah.
Yeah, what else have we got? So all of the little details start to come out. Windowsills looking beautiful. Yeah.
It is all coming together.
It is, which is good because we've only got 3 weeks left.
Well, yeah, at the end of tomorrow, 3 weeks. Oh, goodness.
No pressure.
No stress. I would say also that I think this, and it hasn't even got its top coat of plaster on, but I would say this is the most beautifully done plaster job I've seen on a straw bale house.
Yep.
The attention to detail, the flattening of it, I think a lot of people would not believe it was a straw bale building.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Right, we'll be back at the end. We've got some podcast recommendations and obviously the finishing of those 2 stories. Enjoy the podcast.
There we are.
There we are. Now we know.
There we are.
Kiko Denzer, thank you for coming all the way over here to be on this podcast.
Just for you. Yes. I didn't. Full disclosure, right? We're here visiting family.
Oh,
that's a good excuse.
That is a great excuse. Yeah. And you timed it for Spoonfest.
For Spoonfest.
Very clever.
Yes. Well, it turned out to be a good thing all around.
Mm.
Because who thought I would bump into you again?
I know.
Right? 8 years later?
That's crazy. Yeah. You just popped up on Instagram. And
yeah, finally.
Yeah. Yeah. And I saw some of your spoons, and then you mentioned you were coming over. And then you mentioned that you were actually going to be in Suffolk, which is where we are now. So, yeah, lots of happy coincidences.
And I got to come to Southwold and go to the library and get a cup of tea.
The highlight of anyone's trip to the UK.
Well, it was certainly the highlight. Well, aside from this, it was the highlight of the trip to Southwold.
Nice.
Thanks. Sitting on the Flint Beach.
Yes. It's an interesting beach, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I guess we should start with sort of how we know each other, because we met, I think 8 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the first Approvecho Sustainable Shelter Series building course, some natural building course.
Right. So, and it was the first one.
It was the first one.
I've gotten them confused. Right.
Yeah.
So it was the first basket yurt.
Yes. Is that what you called them?
Yeah. Which was very exciting.
Mm.
The minimal natural build.
Yes.
Sticks and mud and string.
It was that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Sort of wattle and daub from bamboo harvested on site and...
Yeah, and baling twine.
Baling twine, yes. Every
and
good
mud.
Natural build should have some baling twine. And that, so that was part of a larger 7-week program, wasn't it? Where the people, Chris Foraker at Approvecho, he ran a course starting at foundations and going through to sort of finish plasters, I guess, over 7 weeks. And then yours was a little almost holiday from the sort of main build, because the main build was sort of all focused in one project.
Right. I had fun with Chris because I think my role there was sort of to be the fringe, the representative of the outs beyond the pale fringe build, guerrilla build, no code, no more primitive context. What can you do with what you have?
Mm.
And I also remember being pretty focused on the importance of, or the fact that any building is not really just a building, but it's a community.
Yeah.
When you put it together, the people you work with become your community, and the friendships are built on, and the relationships are built on the work, and the work builds the relationships, and you end up with a community, and the building is the story of the community, and trying to keep it as simple as possible. And, Chris did a great thing, and it's neat for me to see what you've done with it. Right, because he was really training people to work in the trades and to bring the materials and the processes and some of the mindset out to the larger world. And I've been trying to live like a peasant for most of my life, so I try not to deal with the larger world.
Yeah.
So there was some I think creative tension there.
Right. Okay. I'd forgotten that was that. Yeah, that was the focus of the course, was building within code.
Right.
And that was why your week was so very special, because that, it sort of was out the window for a week, and it was, creative and much more free. But yeah, so that yurt, are you calling it a yurt?
Yep.
That was the first time I'd seen that sort of Copperthwaite, Bill Copperthwaite, sort of leaned out walls.
Yep.
And I think you showed quite a lot of pictures of his work.
Right. And he was a wonderful sort of hybridizer of traditional materials and techniques. And he really brought the yurt into the into an arena where conventional builders in the States and in Europe could sort of conceptualize applying the basic principles of the yurt to other builds. And a lot of people have used it, and it's a tremendously effective and efficient way to build.
Yeah.
Everything from the circular design, which is the most efficient way to enclose space, to the roof support, and the fact that he actually didn't use any framing. So there's no roof framing in any of those yurts.
Right.
It's all skin.
That's because it's all based on dimension timber, isn't it? So, is that right?
Yeah, except that he would build with 1x boards, and the roofs were just 2 layers of 1x boards.
In a sort of staggered
joints, but all the boards were single boards sawn at the right angle so that he had the radius he wanted at the top of the roof and the radius he wanted at the bottom of the roof. So that established the dimensions of the cut, or the proportions of the cut. And then each board made 2 wedges, and all the pie wedges together made the roof and the cone. And and then it also tensioned the roof, which is amazing, because he'd start out with 4 boards opposite each other, right, to cardinal directions, and then fill in. And then the last boards were wedges that put the whole roof into tension.
It's like keystones.
Right. But then you have, it's a balloon, right? It's a tensile structure, which is absolutely the lightest way to build, right? With the least wood, the least framing members, et cetera, which is totally different. The commercial yurt companies are all using more conventional framing with rafters, et cetera. And I don't know if any engineer has actually done an analysis of one of his yurts. I'd love to see that at some point. But my, I got to build a yurt. I met him by chance, or by serendipity, because his publisher threw a copy of the book at me, because they distribute the Oven Book and a couple others that I publish. And I just decided to go introduce myself when I was in Maine and fell in love with that building. The only round building I've ever been in that really works, because it's concentric, it's not divided. And, well, it was divided, but never into less than, it was like 120 degrees was the most closed division that you got in that. But I invited him out to Oregon to build a yurt with us, and it was a fair amount of structural lumber, and I really wanted to mix sticks and mud. So that's where the basket yurt idea came from. So I built one for a neighbor as a prototype, and then Aprovecha was the first one that was sort of done as a course. Normally, I don't test these ideas out before I bring people into them. Normally, I just say, this would be cool, let's do it.
And then you're off.
And then we're off, Experimentation. So far, no catastrophes.
That was in many ways a pretty important week for me. I mean, not least because, Wattle and Daub was that was the first time I'd ever sort of come into contact with that. And I've used that a lot since. And now I'm sort of using it in a historical sense.
Well, and it's traditional here.
Yes, right. Exactly. So that's sort of come full circle. But then you introduced spoons. And I think, if I'm remembering it right, you had us come in one at a time, and you'd laid out some spoons, and I think people got to vote on which one was it, which one sort of felt the best, or
right. That's a Chris Alexander experiment. He would do that with people because he was trying to understand some kind of a universal aesthetic, and he would lay out choices for people and ask them to choose the object that expressed most completely their, I forget exactly how he put it, but it was, if you had to use this object to communicate to say an alien who you were and what you were about, which of the choices would be the best expression of that.
Yeah.
And he said that he came up that the results were consistent. That there was always one item that tended to be chosen more than others.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's worth trying to prove, but I think it's interesting because as humans, we're all physically connected to the same sources and same origins as everybody else. And it makes sense to me that there's a common understanding, right? And a common set of principles that we all respond to. And I think that's often the motivation for getting involved in something like natural building or green woodworking or, any kind of craft is that the materials speak to you and you want to engage, you want to participate somehow. Yeah, I'd forgotten that piece of it.
Well, that sort of that stuck in my mind, and it spawned a conversation with a housemate of mine. That all spoons have personalities, and then it formed. It actually became part of. He became briefly a stand-up comedian, and he's of Indian origin, and his sort of stand-up was about the things he was getting up to when he wasn't sort of meeting the girls or the women that his family were trying to set him up with for arranged marriage. And one of the examples he gave was, well, I've set up a website called Spoons. I think it's something like Spoons of the World, sort of a play on Humans of New York, where he put up pictures of spoons and then talked about their personalities. So the lineage of that comes from, from Christopher Alexander.
Right. Interesting.
And that Christopher Alexander is pattern language.
Right. And a whole series of other books. Yeah. And a 3-volume tome that's pretty overwhelming, but also fascinating. I can't remember the title. You'll have to insert it.
Yeah. We'll just drop it in.
The Order of Nature, something like that.
It's one of those books that I think it's quoted a lot in natural building. Is the pattern language, language, and I've never managed. I sat down to read it once, and I got so lost within the first little bit.
Well, but it's a reference book. It's not a. I don't think it's a textbook or a book of theory. It's really a reference book, and it's patterns. So it's like there were pattern books in the 18th century for carpenters. This is an object. This is how you design it or put it together. Mm-hmm. And I think the pattern language is that. If you want to build a town, you look at the town section. If you want to build a bedroom, you look at the bedroom section.
Yeah. Yeah, I've come across various elements of it, and shapes within shapes, and
right.
And it's hundreds of patterns, isn't it?
Yeah.
And pattern 412 is. Well, I shall revisit it. Maybe it's one we need for the Heartwind Library.
I think for your library it would be good.
So you touched on there that you have a book on ovens.
Yes, Build Your Own Earth Oven, which was a funny coincidence. Well, I don't know if it was a coincidence. The oven was the easiest thing to build with mud if you didn't have any place to build a building. Mm-hmm. And I took a workshop with Yanto Evans. I got introduced to Yanto because I'd quit my day job. I decided to go back to being an artist, or go back to art and try to be an artist. And I had a little bit of savings, and my neighbor had invited this guy to speak to her anthropology class, and she said I should come and listen because he was living on $3,000 a year in a house he built himself for $500. And I thought, well, if I'm going to be an artist, I should, that got my attention. And he grew up in Wales and had worked all around the world doing development work, mostly working with people who were living in areas where fuel was in short supply. So he was trying to help them build more efficient stoves. Mm-hmm. And he realized that the problems he was dealing with in those countries were really created by overconsumption in first world countries. So he came to the States, or when he'd been in the States, he came back to try to deconsumerize America and got interested in earthen building. He was one of the founders of Approvecho Institute before you got there. And,
quite a long time before.
Yeah,
that, wasn't it?
Yep. God, that's probably been 40 years. But anyway, they were building structures to live in, and he decided to experiment with earth as a building material and built the first cob wall, and it was part of a building at that point. But anyway, after he left APRO, he started Cobb Cottage Company, and the lecture, it was a slideshow. And since he's traveled so much, he showed pictures of people's dwellings and their sort of patterns of living. Uh-huh. And they were all related to the landscape. They were pictures of objects and buildings and places that fit the landscape. And there was so much beauty in the photographs, and the depth of connection between the beautiful forms and figures in the slideshow and the culture of the people that were in the slides. It was very powerful because, I was trying to figure out how to make a living as an artist because I wanted to make beautiful things, but beautiful things in Western capitalist culture are objects, for rich people, and they don't have a relationship with the rest of life. So anyway, it was very inspiring, and I thought, he was teaching a course in a few weeks, and I had a few $100s, and I thought, I'll go and try this. Anyway, we were working on a little cob cottage on a farm that belonged to friends of Yanto's, and we built an oven to bake our bread. And I've been baking bread since I was a kid. And when I left the class, I didn't have a place to build a house. Mm-hmm. So I started building ovens. And then, they're naturally sculptural, and mud is a beautiful sculptural material. So I started playing with shapes and forms and, making odd creatures and just having a good time with the people that I built with. The other thing is mud, attracts other people to play. Mm-hmm. And, and then I had pictures of these cool ovens, and people said, I want one. So I started building them for other people. And then we got other people involved because they wanted to learn, and it became workshops. And then you write up the notes to the workshop, and then the notes become a booklet, and then the booklet becomes a book. So the book came out pretty much when the slow food movement was getting going. The traditional hearth artisan bread, people were starting to get more wide mainstream, and natural building was just getting off the ground. And it's a great introductory project to natural building because you don't have a big commitment. Yeah. And if it fails, it won't kill anybody. So the book was a door into the natural building community, which was, a community of artisans. And they made the activity of sculpting ovens into something normal, as opposed to something sort of fringe or weird or, whatever it is that art is in this society. Yeah. So, anyway, that's a long spiel on ovens.
I can't remember who said it. They were someone more sort of astute than I, but someone called Cobb Ovens, the gateway drug of natural building.
Right, because you get pizza and bread out of them.
Exactly,
Right.
yeah. It's a small little project that you can do. You get inspired, you get food at the end of it,
Right,
and you're hooked, and
Right.
you just want more.
right. Well, and the significance of it is interesting. There's a book called Catching Fire: How Cooking Made Us Human.
Okay.
Right. So by a guy named Richard Wrangham, and his argument, which is pretty well argued and documented, is that it was cooking that allowed our ancestors to get enough calories to grow the brain that enabled them to make the tools and develop the social structures that make
Right.
us actually human. And so the role of fire in culture is central. And of course, the fire is central to the community because that's where the food is. And that's also where everybody comes back to gather. So building an oven, it rings all those atavistic bells.
Yeah.
And it brings people together. And the mud is a material that's simple and approachable to anybody. So, yeah. And there was a point where I had misgivings about, encouraging lots of people to light lots of fires and burn a lot of wood. But I also saw that the most important thing was not a lot of ovens get built and they get used once or twice a year, but the experience of building the oven, it's a gateway drug because the mud is enjoyable, but it's a gateway to a kind of self-sufficiency and empowerment that isn't taught in the schools. And once you do that, then, people have started businesses, they've built houses, they've made decisions to change their life so that they can get out of the rat race and do something more interesting, more significant. I mean, looking at what you're doing here and how you're training people, you build a house, but it's not really the house that's important.
Yes.
It's the experience of working with other people and doing something that's huge. So yeah, ovens are, they're containers, right? Like a house is a container.
Yeah.
And any house, in order to be a good container, has to contain a fire, right? So an oven is a small house with a big fire, and a house is a big oven with a small fire.
Yeah.
And they hold people, and they hold families, and they hold community. So now I've gone ovens to spoons, and spoons are small containers, right? That feed you individually.
Well, I think let's come on to spoons in a little bit. I'd like to talk a little bit more about ovens.
Yeah.
So I've just wondered how many, what sort of numbers of volume?
I stopped counting.
How
How many spoons have you carved?
Lots.
Right? Yeah. No. Yeah. I don't think the numbers are really that important. It's been a bunch, but I've been collecting stories, not very without much discipline or organization, but the ovens I build are probably I think less. It's more fun to hear the stories of the ovens other people build.
Right.
Because of the connections and because of the doors that open and the things that shift for other people. I have friends down near Coquille, where Yanto and the Cobb Cottage Company are, and they built themselves an oven, they started giving bread away. This is the way it works, right? You start giving it away, and then you realize that there's enough demand out there, you could sell it. And so they were selling bread out of a mud oven that they'd built. And then they got to the point where they realized they needed a bigger oven. So they built a commercial sized brick oven. And now they have a baby and a house and a place in the community, and they're the bakers.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yep. Another guy built an oven, never made anything in his life. I think he was, there's a lot of threads to his story because he was into metal music.
Right.
And he'd seen a picture of somebody with a scythe, and just the image of the scythe sort of caught his imagination. Then he was also interested in bread. Anyway, he built an oven. He realized that if he built an oven, he could build a house. So he built himself a house. And then
a cob house.
A cob house.
Nice.
And then he ended up going with his wife to Austria because she was going there for training, and he needed something to do. And he translated the oven book into German.
Okay.
But he also took a class from a place that taught scything,
Okay. Yeah.
mowing with an Austrian scythe. And now he's written a book about mowing with a scythe, which
Fantastic.
is another sort of traditional small scale hand technology that a lot more people are using, and it's very popular. Well, it's traditional in England, and there's a lot of scything going on.
There's a scythe fest.
Yeah, right. Right.
So
And
you're at that one
contests.
next.
Yeah,
next year.
right. Next time I'll have to organize it so I can come for that. Yeah, but there's just story after story. And, festivals like at the Spoon Fest, right? There was an oven, and it fed people pizza all night long.
Yes. That one, they used to build a cob one every year.
Right.
And then,
Yeah, but then moving it around so much.
yes. So they,
and rebuilding it every year.
So I think a few years ago, they made a sort of concrete one.
Right.
And then it had a few problems this year.
Well, no, it was just very wet. It took a long time to get it dry, which was, there's technical, there's, now after doing it for 20 plus years, it's like spoon carving. You start out and it's just a bowl on the end of a stick and it gets the food to your mouth and that's enough. But after you carve a few hundred, you realize you really want to make them one way or another way, and you get particular. So now I'm a little more particular about ovens.
And what's the question I want to ask about that? It's sort of about the sort of evolution of the ovens, like fire speaking Max and Eva.
Right.
That's in my mind. I don't know if this is true. They sort of took the cob oven idea and developed it further to make their oven. Is that how you would see it? Or?
Well, there's all different kinds of ovens. And I think really the other story is the place of fire in the culture, because people who are concerned about, petroleum-based culture, what are your options? We need fire to live.
Yeah.
And if we're not going to burn petroleum, we have to find other sources of fuel. There's a limited supply. So you have to learn how to do more with less. And so there's questions of efficiency. And, what Max and Eva are doing their focus now Max's focus is on masonry heaters.
Okay.
Which is the most efficient way to burn wood for heating.
Yes.
And which can also be used for cooking. And, that's another thing with the ovens is realizing that people just don't know what to do with wood. Especially in America. I mean, I have neighbors who go out in the winter and cut green alder to burn in their stove because they think it lasts longer. And, all you're doing is putting a lot of heat into burning off water.
Yeah.
So it takes longer.
It does burn slower, but not as hot. And
well, yeah, most of your energy is going into burning off the water. And then you get a little bit of heat out of it. And you create a lot of creosote. Anyway, there's all kinds of problems. And, I've taken down chimneys in Oregon that have been used for years to burn wood like that. And, a 12-inch diameter chimney has 3 inches of space and the rest is creosote.
ooh,
Yeah, which is, a devastating fire waiting to happen and a very poor use of wood. So there's, the other piece of the oven thing is educating people or adding to their experience so that they understand how to make the most of the material, and we sort of ran through that lesson at Spoonfest because we had to dry out a wet oven. It won't make pizza while it's wet because the moisture sucks the heat out of the fire. And if the wood gets wet, we had the top of the oven stacked with all those little bits of hickory from the handle cutoffs.
yeah.
Right. Because we needed to dry them out because they won't make the oven hot if they're soaking wet. So, yeah, there's a lot of layers to the onion. You keep learning.
One of the things I remember about the very first at that Approvecho course was we fired up the oven one Friday probably, and it was the amount of cooking you could get done. So the pizzas came out first, and then there was things which needed a bit of a a sort of lower temperature.
Right.
And then one of the things you did, I can't remember exactly what it was you did, but I remember there was something to do with eggs going in. Was it like with red onion?
Hameen eggs, yeah. Which are
was that?
traditional in Jewish culture, because on the Sabbath you can't cook, right?
Right.
You don't light a fire. So you take the Hameen eggs went in with the stew. So basically it's slow cooking. And the beauty of the oven for cooking is that you have retained heat for hours afterwards. If the oven's well insulated, you've got 12 to 24 hours of heat.
Mm-hmm.
So the Hameen eggs you put in at the end with the stew, and you close the oven door and it's in there for 12 hours.
Yeah.
And the eggs go nutty brown and they completely change in flavor, and they're just delicious. And I just met somebody else who, whose grandmother used to cook them, and he does them a different way. He cooks them dry.
Okay.
So the eggs actually shrink in the shell, which is very funny. And they get, the texture changes even more. So there's,
what do they become?
Well, if you overcook them, they become like golf balls. But otherwise, depending on where the egg is, how it's located, one end becomes a little crispy and hard.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a different sort of textural experience.
Oh, wow.
But the flavor is really good. And we boil them with onion peel, which colors the shells, and red onions make gorgeous mahogany brown, purplish shell. Yeah, those are good.
So I'm interested to know, and what do you call yourself? You said you were making a living as an artist, or trying to make a living as an artist. I think you've spoken a fair bit about craft in our sort of previous conversations. A woodworker is another term I've heard said. Where are you on your sort of journey of? Well, I guess I'm asking you to pigeonhole yourself, which I don't like. And I sort of regret asking that as a question.
Well, but I think it's an important question, because I did want to be an artist at one point.
Mm-hmm.
And there's two things. One is, what am I? And the other is, what am I doing?
Yeah.
And we all have to ask ourselves this question. And the art question, the challenge there was, if you want to make a living by making beauty in whatever form, whether it's clay or drawing or painting or music, you need to find a way to convert the thing that you make into cash.
Yeah.
And that conversion changes everything, and it commodifies, right, what you're doing. And it sucks the life out of things. And it all in the visual arts, I have a friend who earned good money, and he said, yeah, I'd rather put my money on the wall where I can see it than put it in the bank, right? So he saw it as an investment. And I find that people who are, motivated by beauty in whatever form want to share it.
Yeah.
And it's the sharing of it that gives it life, and that gives the maker life, right? You can't do that very easily in a gallery culture, because you're separated from the people you're working for. You don't have direct contact with them.
Yeah.
And the community is fragmented. So being an artist is rife with challenges and contradictions and frustrations.
Yeah. An artist as a profession. Is that what you mean?
Well, or as a label, as an identity.
Yeah.
So working with natural materials and building houses in a communal format, right? Working with other people, all of a sudden you have a community of people who all use their skills and talents towards the same end, which is traditionally what art has been. The word means to fit together. Right. So harmony, order, ratio, reason, arithmetic, they all come from the same root, and they're not things, they're activities. And to me, art's the fundamental activity of being human, right? Because if you can't contribute to the making of the community somehow, you're dead, right? You can't live. So coming to understand that and finding a way to work in that context has been the more important goal, right? And I'm certainly I don't know that any of us can achieve it in the current context, right? Because we're overrun and overwhelmed by an economy that's out of control, right? Lewis Hyde calls it the vampire economy, right? Because it sucks the blood out of everything.
Yeah.
It sucks the life out of everything by converting it into a commodity. So then the other thing is the problem with language and labels, right? Because we live with a language that requires the verb to be, and that turns everything into a label.
Yeah.
And labels suck. They don't work. They pigeonhole people, which is why you stopped asking that question. So when people ask, I say I live by art, and the art varies from day to day. Sometimes it's the garden, sometimes it's building, sometimes it's publishing, sometimes it's teaching. And right now it's more doing than earning. So I've got to change things around a little bit. I'm still figuring it out. We built a house.
Oh, yeah.
And that took 3 years. So that was the main focus.
And that's in Oregon?
That's in Oregon. And that was thanks to my mom. So now that the house is done, I've got to refigure out the economy and the income and the mix of activities.
Yeah. And
but woodworking, teaching, ovens, publishing, it's the same sort of basic combination, but different emphases. I'm trying to do more. I'd like to spend more time making utilitarian wooden containers.
Yep. I know that feeling.
Yep. And trying to build a local market. People where I live in England, people seem, I don't know how it happened, but eating off of wood seems a little bit more normal on this side of the pond.
I think only because you've just come back from a festival about spoon making.
Yeah, but there are people who are selling a lot of bowls and plates that people eat off of. Robin Wood's been...
Yeah, I suppose he sort of created the sort of scene. Well, not, I don't think he created it, but
he's certainly
popularized it. Yeah, he's been hugely influential in it. Right. But yeah, well, I always say I've got some spoons of mine in a shop in Bristol, and the people just don't really get the eating spoon as we cook with a wooden spoon.
Right.
Can understand that.
Right.
But the people start going, well, what about hygiene and how do you clean it?
Yeah.
Like, well, you don't think about that with your cooking spoon.
Right.
Which is,
there was a study on wooden cooking boards.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll send you the reference if you want it.
Yeah,
but it's
please
worth
do.
it for people who ask about hygiene, because basically what they showed was that the plastic boards are much worse.
Right.
They carry a lot more bacteria and they harbor a lot more bacteria, and the bacteria stays. Whereas in wood, it doesn't survive because the wood is an antibiotic environment.
Is that all types of wood? Because I think it's maple that's... Sorry, I've spoken American then. Is it Acer, sycamore, that is an antiseptic wood?
That's a good question. They didn't talk about varieties of wood. I think it has more to do with the fact that the wood breathes, and it doesn't, it absorbs moisture, but it doesn't hold on to it.
Yeah.
The plastic, once you start cutting on it and opening up the material, then you make spaces where bacteria can hang out, and the wood will wick the moisture away and then dry out evenly. The plastic, you set it down on a wet counter and it'll stay moist longer.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, I'd definitely like to read that. I can put that in people's faces when they...
Right. Well, and just having it, it's an educational project. People come by the wares rack when I'm at the market and they think it's all decorative.
Yeah.
And, there's the joke right at the Spoon Fest about people not using their spoons because they're too beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
I think, we have to write licensing agreements. If you don't use the spoon, it gets repossessed.
Mm-hmm. When I give a spoon as a gift, it comes with the caveat that that I'd rather it was used as firewood than it was a decorative ornamental thing.
Right. It would be expensive firewood, though.
Yeah. Well, it's got to be used in my mind.
Yeah.
So I'd like to take you back just a step. I'm intrigued to know what someone who taught me about sort of the freeness of building, how your house was built. Is it?
It was a trial.
Right.
It was, and I had resentments all along, and I still have resentments. It's much more house than we really need.
Yeah.
And even though we were able, because of, gifts passed on from deceased parents, we were able to do it without any mortgage.
Right.
Where the code effectively forces you to work for the bank, because what you're building is an investment. It's not a home.
Yeah.
And it's the shape of the market. And George Monbiot just recently wrote an article about how the speculative housing market in Britain has created a system of private taxation on people who can't afford to pay the prices that housing now commands in the country. And it's a crime. Mm-hmm. It's a crime against humanity.
Absolutely.
Every creature has the ability to make a home in the environment in which it lives, and it's the commons. So yeah, building a house to code. On a philosophical level, I had problems with. On a practical level, the code guys where I live were great.
Yeah.
And they, we built a fairly conventional house. It has a mud skin and a mud floor, and it looks beautiful. A friend of mine who's a timber framer got me through the foundation and framing process, which I hadn't ever done to code. Uh-huh. And he knew the whole routine, and he put in some timber frame details that were practical, efficient, economical, and beautiful. Mm-hmm. And the house turned out great, and it works really well. It's warm in the winter. It's cool in the summer. We don't have a lot of inputs. We have a little masonry heater.
Oh, do you?
Yep. Which is thanks to the masonry heater guys who worked hard to get it into the code so that I didn't have any questions about that. So, I'm grateful that I could do what I did, but, it's the result of a lot of privilege and cash, and it,
sure,
it doesn't do anything to right the wrongs that have gotten us here. Mm-hmm. There was one day when a friend brought a friend over to visit, and this guy is a nurse, but he's also a very skilled builder. And in his spare time, he goes to third world countries and helps on sort of mission projects. Uh-huh. And on that day, I was cutting the rafter tails, and I put curves into the rafter tails. So they were installed at this point. So he looks at the rafter tails and he says, "How come you're putting all this time into cutting curves when you've got a house to build?" And I've gotten this attitude from a lot of people for a long time. Like, uh-huh, art is worthless, and why are you spending time on doing this worthless activity that's impractical? And for so many years, it's frustrated me. And this is, but, after a lot of decades, I was able to say to him, the house is a story. And if you want to tell the story of efficiency and getting the most profit at the most speed, then you make it, you just make it fit profit, and you tell the story of rape, pillage, and plunder and environmental destruction. Mm-hmm. If you want to tell the story of beauty and nature and where we come from and the gifts that we have received, and if you feel you have an obligation to return some of that gift as part of your life's work, then you make something that's beautiful and you tell that story to people. And he didn't have anything to say.
That's a wonderful way to look at it.
Well, it was the first time I'd been able to articulate that, what to me is an essential truth, in a situation where somebody was presenting me with a norm and expecting me to just bow to the norm. And the thing is, it's not the norm. For countless generations prior to our current era, that story of beauty has been the essential story, mm-hmm, of our people. And we've forgotten it. right? We need to build it back. And that's why we're doing what we're doing, right? Whether
Yeah.
it's mud or spoons or ovens or houses or whatever. So, yeah.
That's wonderful. That's really, I don't know, warmed me, but also made me think, oh, this building's a bit square.
Well, but you're going to put in, you're going to round the corners, and, you know, just a skin of mud is going to be a completely different experience
Yeah.
for people walking into the building. You know, yeah, you can feel the difference. I go into sheetrock buildings now after having lived in an earthen house or a house finished with earthen materials, and the walls are cold and dead, and you can feel the difference.
Yeah.
And yeah, we need more of that. And just being in England and walking around some of the streets here, the patterned. There was a beautiful house I went by today or yesterday that was lime plastered, and it had applied relief patterns.
Oh, yeah.
Curlicues and grapevines and just beautiful details, and even just scratched patterns in the walls, in panels
Yeah.
between the windows, and the flint cobbles in the walls. Oh my God.
Yes.
They're so beautiful. And have you noticed the difference between the modern ones where all the cobbles are lined up in perfect grids and they're sized exactly the same because they're graded by machine?
No, I haven't.
And the
got
traditional walls, the cobbles are all different sizes.
Yeah.
Because they're the rubble that come out of the foundation trench, and they just get put back in the wall because they're cheaper than bricks.
Yeah, and they're right there.
And they're right there.
We're trying to, as much as possible, use the materials that are right with us. You know, this floor that we're stood on is compacted back from the trench, and we actively look when we come into a new area. You know, we noticed the flint buildings. We noticed a lot of brick buildings.
Were there a lot of cobbles in the ground when you dug the trench?
No, we're in a strange. What I've learned about this area is it's while we might be we're on a seam of come on, brain, silt. It might be just over there that's clay, and just over there it's flint. It's really
It's
choppy.
flint and clay?
I think so. Yeah.
Huh.
I believe those two go together.
And so, explain something to me. The churches and the buildings that are largely flints, is that structural through the entire width of the wall, or is it just a surface?
That I don't know. We've had that same discussion.
Huh.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just a decorative sort of weather shield finish or if that is the wall. I mean, they're not big things.
Right.
Are they?
Right.
So,
well, the church near where I'm staying, first of all, it's round because they didn't have the stone to make the corners.
Yep.
And second of all, the cobbles are set in very thick mortar. And I guess if you have stiff mortar, right, you could make a wall that was all cobbles.
Yeah.
Ready to be like building with cob.
Yeah.
Sort of. And then
sort
you
of
just
cordwood almost. Like that round.
Right. Yeah. All right. Well, when you answer that question, let me know.
I will. You'll be the first person I call. What have I got? So we've skirted round the issue, but let's go head on into it. Spoons.
Right.
So I was stood at the spoon shop table at Spoonfest and was looking at your spoons, and I was struck by I think you're still an artist.
Well, we're all artists, right? An artist isn't a special person. Every person is a special kind of artist.
Yeah.
That was one of your guys, whose name I'll remember. But anyway.
So I was really struck by it was an originality in there that I think a lot of the other spoons lacked.
Huh. That's interesting. I think, the whole Instagram thing, I just got on Instagram recently, and the difference between looking at an actual spoon on a table and looking at a photograph of a spoon, because people tend to photograph their spoons the same way, and then people tend to copy designs. So it starts to standardize things.
Yep.
And the other thing is that there's a big difference. people who are carving beautiful spoons, like a spoon a day, and it's either a hobby or a therapeutic activity, or they're only making a few spoons, so they spend a lot of time, and that's fine, that's great. And then there's the production carvers who are trying to make a lot of spoons fast.
Yeah.
And the spoons I like the most are the sort of peasant craft, the production work that has been made so many times that each stroke is the minimum amount of work to make the maximum result. And
Sure.
The beauty that results from that is a different kind of beauty than what results from hours and hours and hours of painstaking, fine detail work. So that's what I'm working towards. And I constantly get torn back and forth between, trying to get everything, exactly, get the rim exactly the same thickness everywhere and perfect curves with no bumps, and just making a tool that works and that's beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And do you see spoons? Are they sort of central to your craft, or sort of where you at the moment?
Containers are the important thing. I love making spoons. I think it's going to take some education to get people to want to buy eating spoons and to eat off of wood. I've been going to primitive skills gatherings in the States for 8 or 10 years now. And one of the reasons I love going there is because everybody's camping and they're all eating off of wood with wooden spoons. And I see stuff that I've made and I see them in use. And that's right. That feels right. But, trying to sell at the farmer's market is a different story. So I'm trying to figure it out. Bowls, I'm turning a lot of bowls and plates. I think there's prospects there. I made a casket for a friend when her sister died recently.
Oh, really?
The cheapest wooden casket I could find on the web was $1,000, and it was a beautiful piece of joinery. But I think that a box for a body should be available at a lower price, and it should be available locally. So I'm trying to figure out a design and a sort of production scheme for making wooden boxes available.
What was the sort of design and materials of the casket?
Well, the prototype I put together is basically 4 rails on the 4 corners and 2 bottom rails and a sliding dovetail joint.
Okay.
So that you can slip the boards in, no nails, no metal, no fasteners, and a simple lid. And then, if you don't have to spend that much on the box, then you can either hire, pay somebody to carve the lid, or you can spend time with your family decorating the coffin and participating in the passage, which is another thing that, consumer culture has managed to remove from our lives is, the body gets taken away by the men in suits and they put it in a fancy, glossy coffin, and then it gets put in a hole in the ground and covered up with a concrete box, and there's no compost, right? It's got to go back to the ground. So, and there's a marvelous woman in the States who's just written a couple books. She's an undertaker, but she's really sort of grabbed the bull by the horns and is trying to reform the ways in which we deal with death.
Yeah.
So that's cool. So
that's one of the ideas I've got. I'm sort of slowly moving my life towards getting a place in the country, and I think, well, pretty much everyone I talk to is doing the same, looking for that bit of land so they can build their house.
Right.
But one of the sort of hopes is that I want to do a woodland burial.
Right.
Woodland. And what I'd like to do is willow coffins that could be woven by the family, could be sort of introducing a bit of ceremony to that sort of part of it, and bringing people together for something constructive in a sort of more troubled time, I guess. Yeah,
I think that's a great idea. And and teaching, and the whole weaving, that art there's so many threads, right? And each thread pulls on a different part of the culture. So that would be beautiful.
Well, one day, maybe.
Yeah. Well, and in the meantime, you guys have cardboard coffins, which people have been telling me about since I got here and mentioned the idea to a few other people. Yeah, and I'm going to have to go back and look in the States. I don't think we have cardboard coffins. There, you can get cardboard boxes for, well, I mean, that's what they cremate people in.
Right.
But for actual burial, I don't know if that is a thing, but I think it should be.
Yeah. I mean, especially $1,000 you save for.
Right. Well, and that's the wooden one. If you buy the ones from the funeral home, they're thousands of dollars. So it's wacky.
Yeah. An expensive business dying. That's not really fair, is it?
And 30 gallons of propane to burn a body.
Is that how much it is?
Yeah. Yeah.
Goodness.
Right.
It's almost not surprising that our cultures come up with sort of entirely inefficient
and expensive ways.
Yeah. Well, that was a slightly sad
it's all
tangent.
about containers, man. Right?
Yeah.
We're making containers. Stories are containers, houses are containers, ovens are containers, spoons are containers.
How are we doing for time? I can't actually read that anymore. That is just about an hour. So, well, is there anything else you wanted to?
Thank you. And I hope you're telling your story, because your story is pretty amazing.
Thanks.
Just, the path you've traveled, and, from doing graphic design and computer stuff to building buildings and making communities. And
yeah, thank you.
Pretty cool.
Well, it's all due to my experiences, with people like yourself and, the many wonderful people that have taught me things along the way.
Right. But you made a decision to do something different.
I did, yes. Or I made a realization that I was miserable. I think that was the first step, certainly.
Right. But you can be miserable and decide to put up with misery, or you can be miserable and decide that there must be something else I can do.
That is very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And for me, working with my hands, solving problems, those are the things that really make me very happy.
Well, and maybe that's the place to end, because the story that Jane told at the Spoonfest about craft and carving and its role in healing and her work as a doctor.
Yeah.
And trying to change the paradigm. And, she's in the thick of it in London.
Mm-hmm.
That to me was a tremendously hopeful story, because the natural building world is all these people who want to go back to the land and grow a garden and, raise sheep and goats and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And there's still more than half the population of the world is in the cities. And if they're all disconnected, that's not going to help.
No.
And if carving spoons helps connect them to the real world, then more spoon carving, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
More sewing, more knitting.
More sewing, more knitting, more weaving. Yeah. All those things.
Yeah.
Yep.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
What an amazing chap.
He is a lovely man.
Yeah.
I think that's maybe my favorite. Am I allowed to have favorites? Is it like picking your favorite child?
Yes, it is a little bit like favorite children. You're allowed to have a favorite, but they're all
just not allowed
favorites.
to tell anyone.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Well, that one was the best one.
Yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to that one. He's got a very infectious storytelling style. His whole journey that he's taken just seems so kind of matter of fact and organic. I particularly loved the discussion about containers and looking at everything as though it's a container, from a spoon to a casket to a house. I just thought that was a really poetic way to think about these things. It really resonated with me.
And that it's the shared experience as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really tangible through kind of our experiences doing builds like the one we're on at the moment. It's a very real community that gets built And I really liked the way, how did he say it? That when you're building a home, you feel like you're building a house, but what you're building is a community. And the house is the story of that community.
Yeah.
Oh, that made me very happy.
Yeah.
That made me all warm inside.
And yeah, that's something we always come away from these builds feeling, and I'm definitely feeling it now, is the building is actually almost a secondary component to what we're doing. We're having this shared experience. They're pushing some people out of their comfort zones. I really don't like that phrase. There's so much growth, beyond just learning to build a house.
Yeah, there really is.
In the podcast, Kiko posed the question about the flint churches, whether it was just a veneer on the outside or whether it goes all the way through. And he actually sent me a message a few days later, as he was heading to the airport to fly out. What did he do? He stayed overnight the night before.
Yeah.
With I think a random Airbnb type person near the airport. And they went for a little wander, found a church that was half dismantled, I think.
Of course he did.
And saw that the slates go all the way through. It's just sort of a big aggregate.
Amazing.
In the lime.
Well, that's great. I'm glad we can put that to bed, because we've been asking that question every time we drive past a flint wall for the last 4 months.
Yes. Yeah. So the other thing that I promised we'd talk about was Jane at Spoonfest. So Jane is a GP working in London, and she has implemented this. It's sort of craft time almost, like using the doctor's surgery maybe as almost like preventative. So getting people together to do crafts, to carve spoons.
I've heard about this separately.
Yeah.
I didn't realise that was it.
But she gave a presentation about how spoons can be good for your mental health. And it was really very touching. And so she's getting people to do craft in that space, in her waiting room space. Yes.
As kind of while they're waiting for treatments.
No, I think they're coming in specially for it.
Oh, right. Okay. Oh, that sounds amazing.
One thing we wanted to do was to just give you a few podcast recommendations, because podcasts are great.
Yeah, they are indeed.
So do you want to go first?
My one of my top picks is a podcast called The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, who's a famous author who's written The Fault in Our Stars, which is a very popular young adult novel / film. He's very dry. He's very good. And so what he does is he takes things from the human-centered world, the Anthropocene, and reviews them on a 5-star review system, which is very entertaining and very random.
So what sort of things?
So one of the episodes is air conditioning, and another one is sycamore trees.
Right, rated out of 5.
Rated out of 5, with some quite interesting facts and personal anecdotes thrown in there. Another one would be the act of Googling strangers, and Kentucky bluegrass.
Right, so that's the format, is it? 2 things?
Yeah, he reviews 2 things.
Talks about and then rated.
15, 20 minutes each. He has a little bit of a chat about them and then reviews them.
Great.
Yeah, it's really, really good.
Absolutely love it. So my first recommendation is one called 99% Invisible, by the very sexy voiced Roman Mars.
Yeah, he's so good.
It's not just him, is it? There's a few people in there.
Yeah.
He's the only one I could think of. I think he's the main presenter.
Yeah.
But it's all stories of design, kind of things in the built environment. It's generally a sort of a story that then develops, and you get the backstory and you get a bit more backstory. It's usually sort of a 3-parter of interesting things that you wouldn't know are connected. Or
it's really fascinating. It keeps delivering.
Yeah. I had a binge driving back from Wales the other day, and I just knew that I had to tell everyone about it.
Absolutely.
So if you're not into that yet, then please check him out.
Yep. I think my next one would be How to Fail with Elizabeth Day, who is a journalist and author. And she interviews other, so far, journalists and novelists and asks them about their failures in life.
Nice.
So it's a very positive humorous look at how failures can be our biggest teaching moments and help us move forward, learn how to be people better. It very much sums up one of our core ethoses of embracing failure.
Yeah.
So, that's a good one.
Great.
Yeah. What have you got?
The final one for me is Abundant Edge, which is an American chap whose name has escaped me. Very sorry. Loads and loads of content there about design, eco building. I think Abundant Edge is sort of permaculture.
Yeah, it sounds very permaculture.
So yes, I just listened to an episode with Donkey, who's a chap from Sundog Builders.
Oh, right.
Talking about rocket mass heaters.
Nice.
For people that know sort of cob building, the name Donkey won't sound as silly as I felt saying it. If you're listening, Donkey, hello.
Hi there.
Loads and loads of really great topics. So definitely worth getting into those.
Yeah, I'm going to get into that one. I've not listened to any yet, so I have many treats awaiting me.
Mm-hmm. Lucky we've got a 10-hour drive over.
Oh, this is true. Excellent.
So great stuff. Final thing, if you're still here and you're really that dedicated and you're listening to us on iTunes, do please give us a 5-star rating. We've had our first 2-star rating.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Which makes me it makes me very happy.
Yeah, absolutely.
That they bothered to go on and
yeah.
But yeah, if you think we're better than 2 stars, then definitely go and rate us. If you don't, then do something else.
Yeah.
Good. Well, until next month.
Yes. Thanks very much, everyone.
See you. Bye.
Bye.